Beautiful. I will start us off with a karakia. Me inui tātou, I te hui, whaia te mātauranga kia marama, tū maia, tū kaha, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa. For this gathering, seek knowledge for understanding. Oops, and that's gone. No mai hoki mai ki tēnei hui. Ko Yasmin Sarhan toku ingoa, and I am one of the new educator organisers at NZEI Te Riu Roa. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here today, and I'm very thrilled to be introducing our wonderful panelists today who will be leading the discussion around what future ITE could look like for Aotearoa in 2040. Before I do that, I hope that everyone's had the opportunity to introduce themselves in our chat. Let us know where you are, whereabouts in the country you're currently zooming in from, and what your connection to ITE might be. My connection was as a previous student and at the University of Waikato, where I did my Bachelor of Teaching. Beautiful. Now, the purpose of this webinar is because there's a dire need for us to discuss transformation and what that would look like from the perspectives of various people. We need to develop a stance where NZEI Te Riu Roa currently is and a clear position of the direction that we're heading. We need to hear from experts from a variety of fields, and very importantly, we need to hear from you. There's a wealth of knowledge in our community. So we will be providing you with an opportunity later in this hui to provide your input onto a Padlet link that we'll share in the chat for you. And we're very excited to launch a member-focused discussion document later on, and Liam will be able to introduce that. So let's go on to introducing our panelists who'll be providing the discussion for tonight. So may I pass over to you, Bruce, to introduce yourself?
Okay, te hei mauri ora ko te mihi tuatahi ki ngā iho e ngā manu, nāna i homoe, nāna i tango, ki te whare tu nei, tūtono, ki te hunga mate kumini atu ki te pō, haere atu rā, ki te hunga ora kuhui mai nei, tēnei kaupapa, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka tuku mihi atu ki mana whenua o Aotearoa, ngā iwi, ngā hapū, i ngā whānau, tēnei te mihi, kanui te mihi ki o koutou katoa. Ko tongarero te maunga, ko rangatakei te awa, ko Ngāti Tūwhare Toaroa, Ngāti Raukaua o Kuiwi, ko Ngāti Pakiahu Waiwai te hapū, te tikanga ki Tokarangi, tōku marae, ko Bruce Jepson ahau, no te manu kura aka tia. Bruce Jepson, Ngāti Tūwhare Tō, Ngāti Raukaua, it's lovely to be here this evening with you all to share some thinking to our Māori perspective on ITEs. I am of New Zealand Māori Principals Association Te Akatia. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Bruce. Nau mai hoki mai. And let's hear from you, Andrew.
Kia ora koutou, ko Andrew Bird toku ingoa, tumuaki nā tātarakihi o Ahumairangi. So Andrew Bird, Principal of Kelburn Normal School. Been a principal for 20 years and in the normal school for the last 5 years. So I'm here as president of the Normal Schools Association and Model Schools Association of New Zealand. So I guess my expertise, if you like, in inverted commas, that the normal school, I think, is a really unique and special thing to Aotearoa. High quality specialist facilities. The teaching practicum is a crucial element of ITE. And over the years, the normal school has had such strong links with colleges of education, now universities and ITE provider. So we feel we have an area of expertise to offer in the ITE space. Kia ora, everybody.
Kia ora, Andrew. Thank you so much. Alex, let's hand over to you.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Yasmina. Tēnā koutou raurakatira mai hōma. Ko Alex Gunn tōku ingoa e mahi ana au I te whare wānanga o Otago ki te kura kai tai toka, ki o te poti. He kaiako i ngā kōhongahonga ahau. E nāna he kaiako me kai rangahau ki te whare wānanga. Also, I sit in the chair of Te rau ki Titohu Kaiako o Aotearoa, the Teacher Education Forum of New Zealand. And so I'm here with a few teacher education hats on. So I'm a qualified, registered, still certified teacher myself in ECE. I'm a teacher educator in the university system, and I research and support teacher education policy nationwide through my efforts in TEFANS too. And I've worked with a lot of you, and it's great to see so many friends and supporters of ITE in the chat. All you associates and mentors and leaders out there, it's great to have you here.
Kia ora, Alex. Langi, let's hand over to you.
Maro lavaro soi fua maua, male langi e mama. And warm Pacific greetings. I don't know where you all are at, but it's not so warm up here in Auckland today. I'm here to provide possibly a Pacifica perspective on ITE, and I'm here to represent the views shared with the NZEI Pacifica Leaders Caucus. I'm currently at Southern Cross campus here in Auckland as the Student Pathways Manager. So, thank you.
Kia ora, Langi. And Caroline, I'll pass over to you to introduce yourself.
Kia ora koutou, ko Caroline Blomett tuku ingoa. I am a second year 2-3 teacher at Murchison Area School. I've come from an early childhood background and have found primary teaching a whole new ballgame.
Kia ora. Oh, awesome to see so much ECE representation, just my own bias here. So as you can see, each of our panelists this evening will give a kōrero on their perspective on ITE, how it currently works for them, and how their sectors and ways think that ITE could be improved in Aotearoa. Bruce, I'm going to hand the stage over to you to share your kōrero about from a moko te ao Māori lens on the shift that we can make. Kia ora.
Dama mihi, I'm based here in Tauranga Moana. I didn't mention that, but I just wanted to mention that to start off, that ITEs are powerful institutions that need to be seriously indigenised and decolonised. So in reading the brief, we just kick off by saying there's a lot of mahi to be done around indigenisation and decolonisation. Current education practices and those that are being applied by ITE providers that have been created, they are upholding the current conditions that we work in, at the levels of disparity. And so this is a great opportunity, long overdue from a Māori perspective. If there's any chance that we're going to add value and promote Tom Māori, we're going to have need to have an appreciation of why it is so important that our history, the one of white supremacy ideology, colonization and assimilation, which continues to be invisibilized and marginalized and belittle ways of understanding and operating in the world. I'm really interested, as are our membership and other Māori, interested to know to what extent we're going to prepare ITE programs or invest in ITE programs to ensure that teacher trainees have determined learning experiences that allow them to engage and therefore understand the pre-colonial history of Māori. Now, the great work that has started with Te Aho Matua, New Zealand Histories, Mataiaho, the Bicultural Inclusive Working Party, and also the NZ Refresh team are critical pieces of work that can work in towards that. But they don't, standing alone, they're not as strong as in combination with ITE. We need to focus on allowing people to understand that prior to the arrival of colonisers, Māori had developed complex political, economic and social systems that were highly sophisticated and enabled them to successfully sustain themselves in thriving civilization for centuries. It's often the piece that we miss, And so we start loading ITE up with all sorts of things they need to know that actually put Māori in the position we are now, rather than focusing on the opportunities we have to learn about Māori systemologies and understandings. These preparation programs need to also have content that specifically scrutinises those white supremacist ideology derived from doctrines of discovery that arrived when the first European explorers and then the early settlers after them followed on. This ideology necessitated and therefore the origin of racism that we experience and witness here in Aotearoa. However, in my experience, ITE programs usually engage at some sort of tokenistic level, and we need to, in this day and age, move past that tokenistic focus onto tiriti. That's sometimes quite problematic because we see the treaty as the start point, when in actual fact we need to go to prior to treaty and what things were like in Aotearoa then to validate Māori ways of thinking and being, and therefore not ignore the genius and the outstanding success of pre-colonial Māori. Just going through my notes. People know that these incredibly important details shaped how we, if we understand this, we'll then understand how these important details have shaped how we have got here, and these depressing stats have arrived. Pre-service teachers need to learn about what happened once Pākehā outnumbered Māori and gained political power. Treaty education programs often leave out what happened after Te Tiriti was signed, and actually not even knowing that the two actual versions were given. With these pieces of information, we're probably able to act with some sort of authority and have some sort of buy-in by all New Zealanders. The process of colonisation as it is still ongoing for Māori day to day, and that the establishment and implementation of mandated laws that discriminate against the group of academic definition of the system of racism. So ITE is an opportunity to move past tokenistic approach and really get stuck in to understanding and acknowledging Māori ways of being, Māori ways of thinking. A phrase you hear a lot is, what is good for Māori is good for all. And if we include that in our approach to ITE, I'm sure that we're going to gain and leverage off some fantastic opportunities to lead our kaiako into the future.
Kia ora, Bruce. You know what stood out for me from that kōrero is the fact that ITE don't talk about what happened before Te Tiriti. It's very rarely discussed how successful Māori were in their ways of being and what happened before then, and as well what happened after. It's, you know, I've just gotten goosebumps hearing you say that. It is in fact true. Thank you so much for that, Bruce. Ooh. I'm going to hand this over to you, Andrew, to hear your perspectives on how, for you to share your thoughts. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional here.
No, that's fine. Kia ora, everybody. So I think from the normal school perspective, and kia ora to Bruce for that, kind of, I guess from a system sort of aspect, from the normal school perspective, the role of the teaching practicum, the teaching practice is crucial to the success for any graduate or student teacher. So there's a thing which we have in our normal school movement is that the graduating teacher has to be ready to teach on the first day, because in whatever sector, early childhood through to secondary, because in reality they're going to have a class. And so they need to have a skill set which is equitable to the colleagues that they have. So ITE is absolutely crucial. The quality of ITE is just crucial for the sector. You can't have experienced teachers, although they may have developed a skill set over time. The graduating teacher has to have a skill set, which means they can take a class. They can't have an L plate on the door. And so that's where the teaching practicum comes in. And the elements of where the colleges of education, the schools work so closely together, we're not so sure if that's the similar feeling to we have now with the universities. So one of the things about the normal schools movement is getting that diversity in terms of teaching practice. We know that graduate teachers have to work now in a multitude of spaces. You know, they go out to the market, what's in the market, and schools have evolved and changed so much over the last few years. All normal schools are around universities, predominantly high decile schools. So the partnership school element is crucial. So we as the normal school kind of movement really want to see a similar level of resourcing that there is to the normal schools into partnership schools, so that the people who are inside a school that are hosting trainees have time, resourcing, so that they can really put time and energy into the trainee. So another thing that we think about it is that it's the school that the student teacher is going to, not the classroom or not the mentor teacher. They have to have the whole school experience. Because when you think about the attributes that a student teacher has now, we know so much more about education. You know, you think if you're doing a one-year course postgraduate to your Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, you're going to spend 40% of your time on teaching practice. The other 60% of the time, you've got to understand pedagogical theory, sector, understand the sector, develop a curriculum knowledge to cover 8 curriculum areas. You've now got to get a really good handle on neurodiversity, tikanga, te reo, te reo, waitangi, and just so on. And can you do that in a year? Anyway, I'll move on. So the Indigenous approach to IT, I really agree with that. And you know, one question I have is that we had a meeting hui last week, and we met with the ministry, and they were talking about a teaching ITE program for Wisconsin and Melbourne. And I kind of think, well, hey, you know, there's really good stuff going on in Aotearoa, New Zealand. How can we build a program around what we've got? We're a bit unsure of the equality of ITE programs and the processes around the review for that. We're unsure about the research about how successful graduate teachers are going in the classroom. We believe that associate and mentor teachers are crucial, absolutely crucial to the success of a graduated teacher program. They need to be resourced and trained. You know, it should be a unit. Normal schools get an allocation to it, partnerships or schools that take trainees don't. Associate teachers get paid $50 a week or something. I mean, it's absolutely criminal. Losing the train of thought there. So that, I mean, that's a crucial element. You want people training teachers to be trained. We know that they're trained teachers, but are they trained mentor or associate teachers as well? And finally, this year, there's been a bit of a quibble about the +2 space. There was sort of a conversation at the beginning of the year where the Council of Deans sort of presented that, you know, the ITE program only partially trains teachers. The success of a graduating teacher is after they've done the +2, and it's the +2 program which is going wrong. Well, I've been a principal in normal school for 4 years, and I did not get that memo. Anyway, I'll stop while I get there. But that +2 space is a crucial element. That is when the teacher is teaching not quite full time, but and it is right to grow. Do they, when they take on the role of a classroom, are they able to grow within that, other than sort of keep their head above the parapet? And so, as we think towards the ITE, let's make sure those key elements about the Indigenous ITE program, the role of the partnership schools or the normal schools, the equality within the ITE program, that +2 space, and trained people working with teachers on teaching practice. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Andrew. I absolutely agree with that. And, you know, when you mentioned about what happens to mentor teachers or associate teachers, what sort of training do they get? What sort of follow-up do they get? It's often people who have been qualified for some time and in the field who get thrown this responsibility onto them without any guidance or support or follow-up to develop these new lenses.
It's definitely a professional pathway that can be explored.
Definitely.
Cool.
Kia ora, Andrew.
Thanks.
Alex, this leads into your kōrero.
Thank you very much. Okay, so gosh, Andrew, when you were talking about the first 2 years, and this is the kind of halcyon space, I'd like to agree with you and have that extended to our ECE folk, but you know, not all graduates of teacher education go into the same kind of work sites. So yeah, a lot of work to do there, eh? So okay, 5 minutes to talk a little bit about ITE. I'm going to be selective. I just want to talk about 3 things that really mean a lot to me and make a difference in my experience to the work that can be achieved in the profession. One is around partnership. I want to talk about teacher education as opposed to teacher training. And I want to talk a little bit about ITE as a part of the professional pathway. So like NZEI, people in TEFANS, this is an organisation that's made up of institutional members of teacher education providers. We broadly applaud the fact that we're already working on much more localised and partnership-based ITE programs as a result of the changes, Andrew, that you mentioned earlier. This newly developed criteria for program approvals has actually arisen from the profession and in relation to the professional code and standards, which itself is rests on some of those tenets around te ture te waitangi, partnership work, localised curriculum, so on and so forth. And so because ITE programs and people who work in ITE programs are mostly registered and certified teachers, we're really clear about the extension of those tenets for our teacher education work as in partnership with the profession, in the broader profession, sorry. So I think that the idea of partnership is leading much thinking and design in teacher education practice at the moment, because all of the programs around the country have had to be reapproved in the last 2 or 3 years. Some of them are still in that process. And those new programs are just about to start. A couple of them have already had graduates maybe coming this year. The rest of us are coming next year, so next year and the year after. I do think that it's quite difficult to really do partnership well if you're operating as a nationwide teacher education provider, though I have to say, or if you're operating in regions outside of your home base. I know here in Ōtepoti and Dunedin, it's difficult enough for us to work well in Te Takua Aro Te Uru, Ururau me Takatimu, let alone if we were to be working nationwide. And we do have some special relationships nationwide with a cluster of schools in South Auckland in particular that we've had a long established relationship with at Otago, but we stick to our knitting down the south here. And I think that that will take us a long way in terms of doing well by our mana whenua iwi partners. So localised ITE, yes, within a tight but loose framework of minimum expectations so that we can all be assured that graduates who move from the ITE phase of their career into the profession, so that their capability is assured. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is this idea of teacher education, not teacher training. And I know that I'm of a particular age, and quite a lot of my colleagues in the room probably are of a similar age to me. And we came into the profession at a time when we were trained, and then that changed. Discursively it changed, and in policy it changed, and then it changed again in the sense of the shift of teacher education from colleges of education into the university system. I really want to encourage people to engage with this idea of teacher education, not teacher training. It might sound a small thing, it's not. To me, the educated teacher is one who can approach their task with a learning disposition. This learning disposition leads their thinking and it leads their actions because they're invested in that continuous process of learning. Each day, reading the situation, reading the relationships in the room, and learning to be different each day in response to that contextualized practice. For me, there are very few universals to trust within the teaching profession, but the ones that I do trust in are about teachers being able to work in a community of others in a way that is fueled by deep listening, deep respect, openness, awareness of themselves, awareness to the other, with an ability to ask questions, to process information, to interrogate their own beliefs and values, and to make really ethical decisions that can be flexible and attuned to a broader framework of goals that they're operating in an early childhood centre, or in a classroom, or in a syndicate, or in a school, or in our nation. This teacher is a mobile, fluid, situated and adaptable person. This is not what being trained gets you. Being trained, to me, speaks to being a person who acquires a fixed body of knowledge and who can apply a certain predetermined set of skills to a context. The apprentice model, the novice being prepared, who thinks they know the answer before they even know the people in the room. This year, we took on 2 puppies. We train dogs, we don't train people. And I don't, well, and I certainly don't want people who just have a small kete of predetermined skills to apply in the classroom situations they're in when they're leading my mokapuna's learning. These are people dealing with complex situated problem solving, and they need to be in a learning disposition to do that. And then the final thing, Yasmina, is just this idea of ITE as a part of the professional pathway. And here I just want to underscore 2 things. First, the fact that people who work in ITE we're mostly registered and certificated teachers, are just about certified. I often think that. So we're certificated teachers, and we still work in a myriad of roles in the profession, even though this might not be on a daily basis as a practicing kāko with children and teachers. Oftentimes, we are othered by colleagues in our system. We're framed as pointy-head academics who don't know what it's like anymore at the coalface, but actually this is myth. And the research, the New Zealand research about what teacher educators do in their daily jobs shows us this. Even if I take me as an example, I'm in early childhood settings almost every week, visiting student teachers, talking to teachers about PLD, networking, researching, making governance decisions in an organisation that I'm in a stewardship role in, picking up my grandkids. I'm talking to teachers regularly because I work with teachers who are doing postgraduate study. I talk to friends who are at the coalface. It's nothing but myth making to pursue a line of thinking that teacher education, initial teacher education, is not part of the profession. It's our collective responsibility to enculturate the novices coming into our profession, to help them become learned so that they can flex and be fluid and meet the people that they're going to meet in their early childhood services and schools with honesty and integrity and respect. We are the system, all of us, and it's up to us to take care of our own on the way through. So I think there's my opening gambit, and I'll hand back to you, Yasmina. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Alex. You know, just changing that disposition from teacher training into teacher education really reflects how us as beginning teachers feel. You know, we feel trained. We are put in our centres and we feel trained, but then the entire environment does not fit into that training that we receive, because it's not training that you need. You need to be educated to make on-the-spot decisions, to deal with complex human beings that are developing at various stages. It's a whole shift. Kia ora, Alex. We are going, so I don't know if you guys are feeling the same way I am. I just feel like I have a lot that I want to contribute or add, and your kōrero, all of you so far, has really inspired some thinking about what changes can happen. And I see a lot of people have put some things through in the chat. We are going to put in the Padlet link here for you guys soon, for you to pop your thoughts through. So if you've got some inspirational juice coming through, please write it down. I'd really like us to have a look at it later on. Langi, let's hear from you. What's your take on ITE and how can we change? What needs to be changed?
Okay, I think my main job here is to provide a Pacifica lens on ITE. So consideration and inclusion of Pacifica in ITE must move from the appetizer segment or nice to have segment of our training programs into a more permanent and compulsory fixture. Statistics forecast Pacific peoples are anticipated to be one of the fastest expanding ethnic groups in New Zealand society. Pacific peoples are here to stay and will continue to be a growing part of New Zealand's diverse fabric. Needless to say, it's critical that reforms to our education system and more specifically to our ITE curricula reflect this trajectory. National and international research demonstrates that teachers have a significant impact on the quality of teaching and learning, and that there's a link between initial teacher education, teaching quality, and student achievement. The effect has not yet been felt because Pacifica achievement continues to lag behind the rest. This stagnation has always signified the need for informed and rapid change, and those with the greatest potential to benefit our children deserve our attention. In the year 2000, a report titled Leo Pacifica was submitted by Pacifica members to NZEI annual meeting. And I want to acknowledge the wisdom, courage, and collective efforts of those who compiled the report. And following the storytelling traditions of our ancestors, I would integrate some of those stories shared back then as they resonate still two decades later. According to the Ministry of Education's Positive Race Relations in New Zealand Schools Research Project written back in 1995, students interviewed at a predominantly Māori and Pacific school stated they did not consider the curriculum as a problem. They asserted that a communication gap between teachers and pupils in the classroom contributed significantly to the dropout rate of their students. This continues to be a concern for Pacific communities, although the appeal for culturally responsive and relational pedagogy implementation has become more evident, but only if a teacher finds themselves in a school with that as a focus. Many of the teachers interviewed indicated they had had insufficient or no formal preparation to address race-related issues in classrooms. For many teachers, basic pre-service teaching training, sorry Alex, I think I'm from your era as well, using training versus education. Basic pre-service training does not adequately prepare them for the challenges Pacifica communities face today. Many educators perceive the need for more assistance and in-depth training beyond what was available in ITE courses that were frequently electives. Many teachers expressed frustration that courses for which they had registered had been cancelled due to a lack of interest. There has long been a need for the integration of Pacifica languages and cultures in teacher training programs and classrooms, dating back to the mid-1970s, when substantial numbers of Pacifica relocated to Aotearoa. The need is still being echoed in the 21st century. This one-year postgraduate program is insufficient for any teacher education program. There's much to think and learn about entering the teaching profession, and a year is insufficient to acquire the necessary knowledge, skills, and attitudes required for the teaching workforce, especially to serve our diverse communities. Graduates may lack cultural competencies as a result of little or no training dedicated to these particulars, despite the introduction of tapasā in schools, which requires a different panel discussion. Student teachers should be assigned to a number of different schools to ensure that the inclusivity spectrum is covered. There should be a mandated process, not an opt-in one. Student teachers graduate prematurely and are forced into the workforce before they are prepared. And teachers at schools are then responsible for finishing student teachers training. Teachers are averse to mentoring student teachers despite the fact that they are compensated. It's about having enough time to perform quality service. New teachers arrive in classes with a variety of skills, experiences, and their own social issues, and therefore need time to be immersed in the communities they choose to serve. Discrepancies between providers and refresher courses is problematic. A standardized teacher curriculum with greater emphasis on Pacifica and what it takes to serve Pacifica learners need to be mandated. Pacifica language immersion teachers are disadvantaged by the requirement to pass an English proficiency test when they teach in a Pacifica language other than English. $250 every time they need to sit the exam. A greater emphasis on recruiting and training language experts is a vital component of ITE needing consideration and implementation, as New Zealand's growing diverse future will be multilingual. These challenges have arisen as a result of privatization of education, putting financial and economic gains before the needs of people. Our concerns and objectives must be mirrored in the training of overseas trained teachers. There's also a need for a review of these programs in order for them to meet the different demands of the diasporic communities. The 2000 Leo Pacifica report recommendation remains true today, that the Ministry of Education develop strong and effective and appropriately resourced policies, which should include, but is not limited to, the inclusion of Pacifica languages and culture in pre-service teacher training, and other strategies that ensure that all teachers acquire the necessary skills, knowledge, and attributes to assist Pacifica communities. ITE must engage student teachers in the development of critical thinking, personal, professional, and pedagogical skills that will enable them to effectively respond to the cultural and curricular needs of Pacifica students, children, and young people. I think out of everything, we are needing a shift. We're not prepared to wait another 2 decades. I'm fortunate enough to have 2 daughters who are both teachers. I'm not sure if that's fortunate or not, that they made that decision, but one high school teacher and one intermediate school teacher who have both gone through the ITEs in 2 different universities. I'm saddened that our discussions at the dining table are still the same. And I've been in the profession now for 35 years. So I think that at this stage, we are just wanting a shift. We don't want to repeat what was said several decades ago. I think we're needing some action. Thank you.
Kia ora, Langi. You know that your kōrero really brings us back to what Bruce touched on earlier, the fact that we're not working within Indigenous frameworks, we're not prioritizing Indigenous knowledge. We continue to look at teacher education through a colonial lens. We are continuing to prioritize these ways of being and learning and teaching. And if we don't change, we won't be, now we can't, you know, we really cannot. Caroline, let's hear from you, e hoa.
Thank you. Coming as a second year BT, so prior to beginning my training, I worked as a nanny for nearly 15 years. In doing that, I worked with the Te Whāriki as a curriculum, and I worked under MOE regulations as far as planning and assessment requirements go. And I thought after all of this that I'd be well prepared to go into primary teaching. Not the case. I found my ITE experience to be severely lacking despite going in with a really positive attitude. While I enjoyed my training and particularly my placements, I felt wildly unprepared to go into the classroom after finishing my study. I found that the university training at times felt completely irrelevant, and I struggled to connect the theory that we were learning with the how of the practical classroom teaching. The only practical classroom skills that we learned were what was taught on placement, which then left me feeling really overwhelmed and underconfident in that first year of teaching, to the point that I was concerned that my lack of experience and knowledge was actually having a detrimental effect on the children in my class. Andrew's comment about L plates on the door really resonated with me there. It was that I'm a first year teacher and I actually don't feel like I know what I'm meant to be teaching. Coming up to the end of my second year of teaching now, it's with the benefit of hindsight that I know my life experience and my sheer stubborn character is the only reason that I didn't walk away from teaching at the end of last year. Coming into a brand new school as a brand new teacher and not knowing where to find support is incredibly hard. I've searched out all the PD and the mentorship that I could find this year, a lot of it outside of school in my own time, while juggling single parenting, in order to increase my knowledge and gain confidence in my ability in the classroom. Through this experience, I am enthusiastic about advocating really strongly for a better ITE experience. It's not good enough. And I feel that a different model entirely needs to be adopted. The model that I envisage would be universal across all training institutions, where practical classroom time increases progressively over the course of the degree, and with that time, also the responsibility within the classroom. So where your first year, you might be in the classroom 20% of the time and 80% is theory, you're doing largely observation in that 20%, with a little bit of teaching, maybe small groups, as and when you feel comfortable. Second year, you'd go to roughly 50% theory and 50% practicum, start taking on more responsibility in the classroom, to the point where in year 3, you're doing 20% at university, 80% in the classroom, and you're pretty much full control with just having that associate teacher there to support you, to guide you, to give you those little important tidbits along the way. Which by the end of third year would theoretically leave every student feeling confident and capable upon their entry into the classroom. Together with that change in ITE programs, I would love to see a more standardised mentorship program for BTs. I know that many schools don't know what's expected from a mentorship program, and they're lacking the support themselves to be able to set BTs up for a successful career. So I think those two changes combined would make a significant difference to the future of teaching graduates, and hopefully really help improve those retention statistics within graduates in the first 5 years. They're pretty appalling at the moment.
They are. It is pretty horrific how much beginning teachers are, quitting very early on in their career simply because they're unprepared.
And it's really easy to see why that happens. I think if I'd come in as a 21-year-old instead of late 20s, early 30s, I would have walked away.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And that point that you bring about having more practical experience throughout the degree rather than just small portions would really stem well with the whole discourse of teacher education versus teacher training. Education is a journey. It's not a small destination at the end of the year to be done in one block.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop when you finish university either.
No, it's a lifelong process.
I'm learning every day with my kids.
Hi. Kia ora, and thank you for joining us on this call.
Thank you.
I'd really like to encourage you to pop your thoughts onto the Padlet so that we can use them for our next section. So the link is going to be popped through in the chat for you. Oh, aroha mai, my screen is frozen. Oh, there we are. Cool. So the question that I'd like you to answer is, what do you think initial teacher education should look like in 2040? Beautiful. There we are. I'm going to pass this on to Liam, who's going to introduce the next section of our kōrero with, oh, there you are. Cool. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, lovely to be with you all this evening. I feel really lucky to have heard the level of content that we've heard from our panellists, because I think the bit that stood out for me is the part that connects everything that we've heard from our panellists is it's grounded in the professional responsibility that we have to care about initial teacher education. I think this is what separates us from a normal 9-to-5 job, is that we are a part of a profession. We have got an inbuilt responsibility to make sure that we are bringing through and nurturing the next generation of educators. And what I've heard from not just the panelists, but also the quality conversation through the chat is that that's clearly something that we take to heart. My part is to officially launch a discussion document for members of NZEI Te Riu Roa. And it's a huge privilege to be able to do that. And it's a bit of a breakaway in tradition from how we normally form positions as a union. Normally that would come through to annual meeting, but COVID willing, that hasn't been the case. And so like everything, we've looked to adapt. And I guess the plus side is that it actually allows us to take the conversation out to our full membership of 50,000. And so that is what we're going to be launching shortly in the chat, a link to all of the resources and the discussion document. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background around the document, because while we're in a position to acknowledge the fact that that we see the need for transformational change in initial teacher education, in particular, there were two key things that we wanted to keep front of mind. One was that transition had to be towards a Te Tiriti-led approach to initial teacher education. And the second one that we've heard from Alex is around that equity for early childhood education. Our kaupapa as a union has been built around a teacher as a teacher as a teacher. And what I know coming from a primary background is that there's actually a really low level of understanding of the complete void of resources that exist in the early childhood sector for initial teacher education. And so when we're talking about transformation and change, we wanted to keep those two ideas first and foremost. And so our kind of wading into the initial teacher education conversation started at the beginning of the year when we called a sector-wide hui, where we started that conversation around to what extent are the issues that we're hearing from our view of the world consistent with what everyone else is hearing. And I've quickly learned that initial teacher education is one of those things where everybody's got an opinion on, particularly around where we need to see change. And I think what I've learned through that journey is that as a country, we do have pockets of amazing practice of initial teacher education, but it isn't something that tends to scale particularly well in our current system. And so while we can spend time looking overseas as to what's effective there, actually there's an awful lot of good stuff happening here in Aotearoa that we need to be building off. And so it is with that in mind and the conversations that we've had up until now that we are today launching this discussion document. There's three key themes that the document is broken down into. The first one is around how we build a genuine Te Tiriti approach to initial teacher education. The second one is around ensuring that we've got the capability and capacity to deliver what we need. And then the third one is how we take a collaborative approach. And all of those things are very, very easy to say, but the change itself is something that we acknowledge takes time, which is why we're talking about initial teacher education in 2040. And so to make sure that we're not just focused on the long-term change, we have broken down our thinking into what are the immediate short-term changes that we need to see, what do we want to see over the medium term, and then what do we want to see over the long term. And so I won't take you through all of the ideas that we talk about there, but I certainly want to give you a taster to make sure you're actually going to go to the website, download the document and engage with the content. We talk in the document around moving away from the use of fixed term contracts for new teachers. We talk about wanting to bring in minimum qualifications for associate teachers and mentor teachers as a way of really building them into a career pathway. We want to look at how we're creating funding to be able to engage iwi in a conversation around their role in initial teacher education, with the potential for ideas of them providing some type of accreditation process. Along the way, we want to lift the minimum requirements around reo speaking educators that are graduating. And then we start to move into some of the bigger system level ideas. The first one is around how we build much tighter connections between initial teacher education, PLD, curriculum advisory, and leadership. And we think that borrowing from that uniquely Aotearoa, the way that is led and governed needs to be Te Tiriti led. The second big idea that we talk about is how we create a model where both schools and early childhood centres are consciously opting in to wanting to become places where they partner with initial teacher education providers and become hubs of best practice. And we know that that can't just happen in name. That is going to have to be staffed and resourced to ensure that those schools and early childhood centres have got the capability to be able to become those high-level partners with ITE providers. And then the last big idea is being touched on by some of our panelists around how we do a better job in the landing that our first and second year teachers have into the sector. And so it's quite a big idea, but we're suggesting that first and second year teachers come into the role without whole class responsibility during their first 2 years, and they work in partnership with an ITE provider, their qualified tutor teacher, to complete a postgraduate level qualification that would really bring to the surface a really, really strong commitment to theory and practice, with only once they're fully registered that they would look to take whole class responsibility. There's certainly more in the document than I've just laid out there. And so if we can have the next screen up, because it lays out a bit of a timeline. I see in the chat that we've got a link to our website where you can get access to the timeline, the discussion document, and the survey for you to be able to contribute your thoughts. We're going to be launching it today, and we will be actively promoting it across the membership. We're encouraging both individuals and group submissions through the survey, and we're going to keep that open until late February next year, because we want to acknowledge that diving into this conversation just isn't going to be top of the mind for particularly the likes of Auckland and Waikato. And it is going to be that member feedback that is going to help us shape our final position paper. And so it'll be in early March that we're going to be launching to the wider education sector, NZEI Te Riu Roa's position paper on ITE 2040. And then what we want to do between the launch of that document and late term one is to build allies for change, and to have that culminate in a sector-wide initial teacher education hui at the end of term one next year. We know that parts of the change that we're talking about is going to become embedded into the hui aruatia campaigns for the renewal of collective agreements. And so we are really looking forward to how we can leverage some of that political power of 50,000 members and a sector full of allies as we look to bring about short, medium and long-term change to initial teacher education. I have gone and spoken far longer than I should have. Yasmin, I'll pass over to you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, and aroha mai. I do see how we are running short on time, but I'd really like us to continue this conversation. So please ensure that you continue to have this kōrero with the people around you, and the link is in there for you, so keep an eye out on it. Beautiful. Also keep your eye out for the NZEI Te Riu Roa news that will have an update and more information as we go through this process. I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight, and thank you to all our panelists for providing your insights and your perspectives on the future of ITE. And aroha mai, oh, Bruce, I did get quite emotional when it came to your section. Beautiful. Let's close us off. Ihara taku toa I te toa takitahi. Ingari, he toa takitini. My successes are not mine alone. They are ours. The greatest successes we will have are from working together. Pō marie I te whānau. Ka kite.